What we're going to cover today is, I think we've been talking about it for, I think I might have been bringing it up to the community for about 6 months, that we had been working with, or we were lucky to have the University of California, Berkeley, specifically the Berkeley Center for Criminal Justice, correct? BCCJ approached us some time ago to ask us if we wanted them to do a study on crime in East Palo Alto. Going back to some of the archival data, I could not find, I don't think we actually did find, any previous report that had been done. So, and this is important to us because, I mean, I don't have to tell you whether there's crime or not crime. I don't have to tell you if it's up or down. You can tell us before any statistic can tell us. So I don't think there's any surprises, but what may surprise us, what may hopefully energize us and even create more synergy, is that the reductions that you've seen over the years, and I said you because we're going back 20 years now. We're going back to the 1980s and 90s. Well, we knew what the reductions were. We heard the stories. We know what works were being done. I was told about that when I got here, from the white hats taking license plates in the park, to people, to Mrs. Rowdy fighting drug drillers and reporting on them getting shot. So all the stories of bravery and courage that the community has demonstrated over the years. So we know what contributed to the reduction. What we did know, what I didn't know, is how dramatic it was relative to, compared to the state averages, other communities, especially when you add our limited resources. So without getting into the details, I think there are a lot of lessons that will come out of this report about what we have done, and I think it reinforces the good work that has been done, but it also highlights what has to be done. So not to end with a negative, but with all the positive accomplishments, once again, I don't have to tell you, our crime rate is still too high. The violence is too high. We're at 4 homicides so far this year. I'll stop there to say that you can make the comparison where we're at last year. But if we end at 4, and I think we have 2 weeks left, that will probably be, that will be the lowest homicide rate since 1999. So in one sense, that goes and coincides with the report. In the other sense, 4 homicides per capita is still going to be among the top 10% or 15% homicide rates in California. Okay. So we can celebrate, and I think we should always take a moment to acknowledge, and I would say not celebrate, but acknowledge the great work that has been done and accomplishments, but we do so that we have our moment of pause, our victory, so we can continue forward. So with that, let me introduce Sarah Lawrence, who's the Director of Programs at BCCJ. And did you bring your other report, Sarah? Nope, you forgot. Okay. I met Sarah, it's got to be 2 years ago now, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when I was invited to participate in another study that Sarah's working on, and it deals with creating or employment opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals. And she had a pretty good cross-sections of police leaders, district attorneys, community-based organization, personnel, executives, people that deal with the issue of hiring and jobs and formerly incarcerated. And she got some copies of the report, and it's online, because East Palo Alto is involved in a couple ways. 1, through my participation on this panel, and 2, it highlights some programs like the East Palo Alto First Source Hiring and others, well, specifically that one that contributes to providing jobs. So we met some years ago, and this is when she approached us about this study. So 1, I want to thank Sarah and Gregory because, and I'll put a price tag, and it's not for her to do that. If we wanted to outsource this and pay for a study of this magnitude, we're probably in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 to get something that way. And for her to provide the support to use a grant from Wachovia, right? Wachovia, obviously allows us to use this information without hitting the general fund budget or even grant funds, which means that's money we can still use for other services, but still have that vital information. So 1, thank you, Sarah, for approaching us and asking to partner with us to do this, which is very good. 2, help yourself. How you doing, Pastor? Good, sure. 2, it's it's going to prove very beneficial. So I want to thank Sarah, and I want to introduce her. I'll let her get into her own background, and you can introduce your colleague, Gregory, who's kind of hiding behind Captain Estelle, about the report and what it means. So with that, I'm going to be quiet, and Sarah, it's all yours.
Thanks, Chief. And the other report that Chief referred to, I've got copies, and we'll just make them available at the end as well. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming. My name is Sarah Lawrence, as the Chief said. I'm at the Berkeley Center for Criminal Justice, which is a research policy group within the law school. We are a center of about 7 or 8 people, and we've been around for 4 years. The mission of our group is to link research, scholarship, knowledge to practice, practitioners, people in the real world. So the mission of our group is sort of to serve as a bridge between the people in the university and researchers and people who are practitioners and do the real work every day. As the chief said, we met a few years ago on this other collaboration and had a good working relationship. My center got a grant from the Wachovia Foundation, and the grant was intended for us to partner with a bunch of Bay Area cities to do some crime analysis. We did a little bit of work in Oakland, we did a little bit of work in San Francisco, but the thing for me that was appealing about working with East Palo Alto is typically communities that are smaller to medium size, the police departments don't have the internal capacity to do kind of big picture analysis. They're just too small, they don't have it like the big cities do. They have the data, they just don't have the time or the resources to actually step back from the day-to-day responsibilities, take a big picture view about how things have been going. So I thought that this would be a good community to partner with, and the chief was very interested, and that is more than a big deal in terms of deciding who you're going to work with, because we've had other police departments where if you don't have the buy-in from the chief and the officers and the staff, then it's really hard to go. So that worked well, I appreciate that. What I'm going to do tonight is I'll give a quick overview of this study. There's a lot more detail in the actual report. We've got 2 versions. We've got the full report, which is 40-something pages, lots and lots of detail. We've got an executive summary that's about 5 pages and just shows the highlights of what we found. This is going to be, just some of the highlights. I don't want to bombard people with too much data in too little amount of time. So just some of the highlights, and afterwards we can have some Q&A, or I'm happy to stick around after everyone, and anyone wants to just come up and talk to me, I'm happy to do that. So I'll just start with giving an overview of the study, what we did, what we used. The topic areas we're going to look at are going to look a bit at the population growth of the city, talk a little bit about property crime, talk a little bit about violent crime, and delve into a little more detail about violent crime. We've got some data information on shootings, and we did some case reviews of homicide victims and homicide offenders. Talk a little bit about some police per capita data that we have, and then I'll just go through some summaries of the findings that I have presented tonight, and there are others in the main report. So the purpose, hopefully, is that this is just information that can educate and inform the police department, city leaders, community groups, residents, so everyone's just speaking from a common foundation of knowledge. My hope is that this is really a big picture step back and where the city has come over a period of 22 years. And as you'll see, a lot of this covers a 22-year period from about 1986, which I think is when the police department started collecting crime data. What we did was draw from existing data sources, so we didn't collect any new information. So this is stuff that already exists. It's just a matter of sifting through it, pulling it together to tell a story. And so our hope is that this can be used for future years to update it. It'll be very easy to update with new data every year because the templates are there, and so our hope is that you can make it a fairly regular publication to refresh it with new data. The major data sources we used was the Uniform Crime Report, which is kind of the standard crime reporting system through the FBI, the violent crime and property crime, and it's sort of the data source that everyone refers to when they talk about violent crime in the media. We used California Law Enforcement Telecommunications Systems, referred to as CLETS, which is essentially the criminal records and criminal histories of individuals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We looked at calls for service data to get an understanding a little bit about shootings, and then we used some data from the U.S. Census. So this is all stuff that exists, and we just put it together and to try to tell a story.